Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What is the most disturbing, creepy, scary, or unsettling place you know of or have been to? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I spent a lot of time at a graveyard growing up, family business, so when I was lucky enough to honeymoon in Paris, I just had to go to the catacombs. It's pretty cool at first, but it's quite a bit further down than I expected, and you aren't on a guided tour or anything. You're just wandering through a shit ton of human remains that some dude arranged. Eventually, our steps quickened, and by the end, we couldn't wait to be out. Not scary, just a really uncomfortable feeling. My friend found an abandoned cabin outside of our hometown, so 3 of us went to check it out one night. It was absolutely trashed on the inside, and the only piece of furniture was a gray locker against the wall. I didn't have the guts to open it, so my friend did it very slowly. The only thing inside was a mason jar full of salt. I'm not sure why. Just something about that being the only thing inside really unsettled the 3 of us, and we drove back to town. Found an abandoned I Hope house right off a main highway in my city, completely overshadowed by giant trees and other bushes and tall grass. Walked in with 5 of us at night, and the place was absolutely trashed. Saw a broken toilet as we walked in and couldn't see the floor because of the massive amounts of newspapers, bottles, packaging, cardboard, etc. all over the ground. I walked into what seemed to be a main living room, and there was a calendar posted on the wall dated 1984. Just a very creepy place. The concentration camp at Mauthausen. It's a place where tens of thousands of people were gassed, shot, experimented on, or worked to death. I went for a job interview for a place where the office was in a building that was once a mill. Never before had I been so thankful that I didn't get a job. Seriously, old mills are creepy as F to me. There's a lot of stuff that makes me feel unsettled, like the obvious building code violations that always get swept under the rug, the smell of dust and dead people, the fact that it's so quiet that you can hear your stomach digesting that burger you just ate, and its desolation. Dear God, the desolation. There may be someone down the hall, but it still feels like you're all alone in there. Sometimes you can almost hear the screams of the past generations as they get their hands mangled in the machines, a sacrifice for the need to provide for your family. The offices of Centrelink, a labyrinthine nightmare where things are never what they seem, words have no meaning, and where time stands still and stretches to infinity at the same time. I hear tell that there is someone who actually got the service they required, but like most, I find this tale hard to believe. Inside the Mormon temple, swearing oaths so sacred that to speak of them carries the death penalty. Or was it being naked and touched by old men there? I can't really decide. Monterrey, Mexico. It's not right. It's like a hobo wearing the skin mask of a rich person. I mean, there are other places I've been to that have been poorer and arguably more dangerous, like Belize City, but Monterrey seems to actively try to sweep its seedier parts under the rug and present itself as this happy, modern, wealthy place, like it's trying to lure you in. Meanwhile, other parts of the city you're told not to venture into, and the walls have broken glass cemented on top of them. Hotel Ukraina in Moscow, 1990. It was dirty on the outside. Then, a giant, gothic, strangely beautiful Stalinist skyscraper that you know Stalin had a hand in okaying and designing. Something about it made it seem like a haunted house. Creepy. I was hanging out with some people at a bar, and we went to one of the guys' place. All of a sudden, I noticed that all the women had left but me. I had a ton of guy friends, and I hang out just me and them all the time, and it's chill. But that crowd that night at that place just seemed off. People started to drink more and more guys kept arriving, and I started to have a really creepy feeling, and I just had to leave. The vibe went from okay to creepy in less than 30 minutes. There's an abandoned cemetery in Battle Creek, Michigan, out by the factories and the airport. It's off of Brigham Road. I don't remember the name, but it's completely fenced in, and it's about 20-minute walk from a side road to a creepy path in order to get there. It's completely surrounded by trees and in the middle of a forest area. It's so unsettling to go in there. The latest person to be buried was in the 70s. I'm not even sure how many residents know it exists. There's graves there from the early 1900s. I did some research on it after I first went there I could barely find anything on it. East side of Detroit. It resembles a third world country. Most of the stoplights down work as the residents have stripped all the wires. The ones that are working, no one pays any attention to. You don't stop your car. You don't get out of your car. You stay on the main roads and never leave. Garbage everywhere. Ex-boyfriend's mother's house. The place looks like an old Victorian knick-knack museum, downright to the creepy dolls, and I had the misfortune of doing mushrooms there. It was the worst trip I ever had. Detroit, Michigan. Specifically, the portion of the city that do not have streetlights. I love downtown, and midtown is cool, but it can be unnerving driving through a series of graffitied, burned-out buildings in the evening when there are no functioning streetlights within 2 blocks. Rosewood Asylum in Maryland. Went with a girl, date thing. We were both into that sort of stuff, abandoned places with a history and the nature of mental health institutions over the years. The old abandoned buildings just gave us both this feeling of how much history had happened there and an overall just feeling of creepiness and discomfort. The place has a history of ice pick lobotomies and mistreatment of patients, much like many state mental institutions from the mid-20th century. It also did not help that it got dark while we were there. Me and a few friends were scavenging around in the woods behind our house, and then all of a sudden, we ended up in this massive junkyard. There were goats tied to chains and shit. It was weird. We explored for a little, and then out of nowhere, some dude came chasing us on a quad, and we sprinted out of there. Haven't been back since, and never will go back. An abandoned mental hospital. It was a small building on the campus of a workhouse jail that was locked up and hadn't been used for anything in decades. When I was in high school, some friends and I heard about it and decided to visit. It was very illegal that we were sneaking onto a county correctional facility and then breaking into a locked building, which I think freaked me out more before we got there than actually going to an abandoned mental hospital. It was so much creepier than I imagined it would be. There were padded cells with brown stains all over, a few rusty wheelchairs, and lots of little creepy things. Leather straps, IV stands, an obviously broken mixer in the kitchen area. A few random pieces of furniture remain, some metal folding chairs, small end tables, and armchair, all of which were scattered and not arranged in any logical fashion. The building itself was in a state of disrepair. Large chunks of wall, floors, and ceiling were missing. It was odd, since the building was on the campus of a functioning correctional facility. All the buildings on campus were very old, but this one had seemingly been abruptly abandoned, locked up, but not torn down. I'm not a believer in the paranormal, but after an hour or so of exploring, something dripped on my arm. Didn't care to see what it was, just bolted out of there. Old gold mines in Broken Hill, Australia. One was just a twisted hole in the ground with some logs wedged in various places to hold the sides out. You can see how lots died in the old days. The second went down via a cage on a huge wire rope, very noisy and shaky, pneumatic drills and side tunnels that had already caved in. Found an abandoned house in my neighborhood a few years back with some friends. Besides the usual mess you'd come to expect from a creepy old house, we found evidence of a drug lab. Gas masks, various chemical bottles, and giant gas tanks were lying around. In the master bedroom, we found a small box full of at least 30 to 50 driver's license. Possible serial killer? At that point, we got the F out of there. A week later, we went back and decided to check out the basement this time. Before we made it down the stairs, we heard someone open the basement window and crawl out. Whoa. We ran home and never came back. I get chills thinking about that place, considering a possible tweaked out murderer could have been right below us the whole time. A torture museum while walking around the Republic of San Marino. It was described as some tourist attraction, and like many things, we went in with the expectation that we'd pay a few bucks and walk around for a few minutes and go, well, we did that. But it was awful. Actual instruments of torture and death on display, and me anxious as hell walking around wondering if the rope holding the guillotine's blade is strong and secure, and just imagining the horrible pain inflicted. It wasn't a fun museum. I have nightmares about it sometimes. My grandfather's old podiatry office that was attached to my grandmother's house. My grandfather was a raging alcoholic and an all-around asshole. My mom would not allow us to see him, and I never even went to my grandmother's house until after he died. Every time I went in there, it had this haunted feel, and it gave me the creeps. Backstory: Gramps was an abusive father and husband emotionally, mentally, and physically. My grandparents divorced, but he still got to keep his office. There's two places that pop up in my mind. Once I was coming home with my mom from my grandparents. There was a sign on the side of the road saying, "Tools for sale, turn left." We traveled down that road for a bit and found another sign that showed us to turn into a gravel road that fed into a cul-de-sac. There were 3 small houses there, and about 3 or 4 tables with old tools sprawled out on them. Nobody was there though. Immediately, my mom and I both got a bad vibe from the place and hightailed it out of there. I think it's silly now, considering they probably were just taking a break from being in the sun. The other time was when I went to Westport for a fishing trip. The entire town was covered in an extremely thick fog, so much so that we could hardly make out a hotel across the port. The town seemed to be devoid of any human life at first. There were stores and restaurants in the middle of town that were filled with creepy window displays, especially ones that looked like an old 1960s living room. Soon enough, we finally found that people were just inside the restaurants next to the port, as well as the nice hotel mentioned earlier. In Anchorage, Alaska, one of the main malls is pretty ghetto, for lack of a better word. They are currently trying to spruce it up, and it's getting better, but the whole upper level of the actual mall, there's a bunch of floors above it for offices, is really dilapidated. Among the strange things on that floor is a very, again, ghetto movie theater that hasn't been updated since I've been alive, an arcade in the same condition, a homeschooling center that never has anyone in it, and a large hallway area that leads to nowhere. But by far, the creepiest thing there is this restaurant called the Three Bears. It's a Chinese place that has been closed at least 2 years, tucked into a rarely used corner of the mall. The chains that come down in front of the mall stores is there, and we always used to look inside until one day, a black sheet of plastic was put up behind the chain link curtain. But then next time we were there, it was torn down again. So I'm guessing we aren't the only curious ones. Anyway, so the creepy thing is, everyone is still there. Buffet counter, tables, chairs, silverware, kitchen utensils, everything. After speaking to a friend who is in upper management at the mall, we learned the owner was arrested for multiple counts of fraud and other things and is in federal prison. Makes me wonder what she was serving there. I was on a school trip in a mine that had stopped production. A few meters in the mine, there was a diagonal shaft with a wagon that went hundreds of meters deep down the mine. The guide, people who had worked there before, told us that once, on its trip downwards, the wagon's cable broke and the whole wagon was speeding towards the bottom. Just standing there, thinking that several people had been speeding down that shaft and crashing into the ground, really got me. I was recently on holiday at Waiheke Island in New Zealand, which, despite being only a short ferry ride from Auckland, the largest city in the country, the eastern half of the island is basically all farmland with very few people. At the very tip of the island are some old gun placement sites from World War II and a system of underground tunnels connecting them. I was exploring them when I realized that I was in the perfect horror movie setting. Dark tunnels, miles from civilization, on a remote island. I was glad I wasn't alone. I even started feeling draughts blow through the tunnel and hearing voices coming from somewhere in the distance, although I knew those were just other tourists. The worst part was when I stumbled upon a mannequin in a side room, which was part of a display showing what people would have been doing during the time the tunnels were being used. Turning a corner and seeing a pale human figure in the darkness is not the best experience, I tell you.